I thought the moment my stepmother shoved my 8-year-old onto the hardwood floor was just about cruelty. I was wrong. It was the permission slip I needed to burn their world down. They expected me to cry and apologize like always. Instead, I did exactly one thing, and that single action was enough to make their entire empire, built on decades of lies, collapse from the inside out. My name is Marlo Bennett, and for 34 years, I had been trained to be invisible in my own father's house. I was the practice child, the rough draft before he got it right with his second family. But as I stood in the foyer of the sprawling estate in Ridgewater, Pennsylvania, shaking the snow off my coat, I told myself this night would be different. I told myself that if I just smiled enough, if I kept my 8-year-old daughter Haven quiet enough, and if I bought a gift that was expensive enough, we might actually survive New Year's Eve without an incident. The air inside the house smelled of expensive pine, roasted beef, and old money, a scent that always made my stomach turn. This was the kingdom of North Pine Heritage Works, the company my grandmother had built from the ground up, and the company my father, Grant, now presided over like a tired king. The dining room was already packed with people. There were cousins I had not seen in a year, former business partners who still remembered me as the little girl who ran around the workshop, and the usual court of sycophants who hung around my stepmother, Colleen. I held Haven's hand tightly. Her palm was sweating. She was wearing her best velvet dress, the one we had bought at a discount store 3 towns over. But she looked beautiful. She looked hopeful. That was the problem with children. They have not yet learned that some families are not designed to love them back. We found our spots near the end of the long mahogany table. It was not the kids' table, but it was certainly not the power end where my father sat. Colleen was already holding court, swirling a glass of white wine that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. She looked at us, her eyes flicking over Haven's dress, dissecting the fabric, the fit, and the girl inside it. "You are late," Colleen said, not as a greeting, but as an accusation. "It is 7 o'clock, I replied, keeping my voice level. The invitation said 7. Colleen hummed, a non-committal sound that suggested I was still wrong. Regardless of what the clock said, she turned back to a woman on her left, a wife of one of the suppliers, and said loudly enough for me to hear, "It is so hard when you have mixed company, when you have the family, and then you have the visitors." I felt Haven stiffen beside me. She was young, but she was not stupid. She understood tone. She knew what visitor meant. I squeezed her hand under the table and whispered that everything was fine. I was lying. The dinner was an endurance test. Course after course arrived, and with each one, the tension in the room ratcheted up. My father, Grant, sat at the head of the table, looking flushed and jovial, raising toasts to the legacy of the company, to the future, to prosperity. He looked at me exactly twice, once when I passed the salt, and once when Haven accidentally clinked her fork against her plate. His look was not angry, but it was vacant. It was the look of a man who had delegated the emotional management of his daughter to his wife and washed his hands of the result. Colleen spent the evening managing the narrative. She told stories about the summer house, stories about the new line of furniture, and stories about the brilliant future of the company. Every story featured my half-brother, Dylan. Dylan was the golden child. Dylan was the heir. Dylan was coming to save us all. "Where is Dylan?" someone asked around 11 o'clock. "He is coming." Colleen beamed, her face lighting up with a warmth she never directed at me. "He had a very important engagement, but he would never miss the countdown. He is bringing the little princess." The little princess, that was Sloane, Dylan's daughter. She was 6 months younger than Haven, but in this house, she occupied a space so vast it left no room for anyone else. The hours dragged on. The champagne was opened. The noise level rose as the alcohol did its work. I checked my watch. It was 10 minutes to midnight. Haven was rubbing her eyes, her legs swinging restlessly under her chair. "Can we go home soon?" "Mom," she whispered. "Soon, baby. I promised. Just let them do the countdown." Then the front door slammed open. A gust of cold wind rushed down the hallway, followed by loud laughter. Dylan strode into the dining room, looking like he had just stepped out of a catalog for wealthy, carefree fathers. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit too perfectly, and in his arms, he carried Sloane, who was wrapped in a white fur cape. The room erupted. It was as if the Messiah had returned. My father stood up, his face breaking into a genuine smile for the first time that night. Colleen clapped her hands together. "There they are. The real party can start," Colleen announced. Dylan walked toward the table, high-fiving a few of the men, soaking in the adoration. He looked at me, and his smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A spasm of guilt, perhaps, or maybe just annoyance that I was still there, before he plastered the grin back on. "Hey, Marlo," he said. "Hi, Dylan." He didn't stop to talk. He walked straight to where Colleen was sitting. Sloane was awake, looking around with sleepy, entitled eyes. Colleen stood up. Her movements were sharp, precise. She looked at the table arrangement. The room was full. Every seat was taken. The waiters had cleared the dessert plates, but the guests were still lingering, crowding the space. Colleen looked at Dylan, then she looked at Sloane, and finally, her gaze landed on Haven. Haven was sitting quietly, sipping a glass of ice water. She looked up as Colleen loomed over her. "We need this spot," Colleen said. The room did not go silent immediately, but the conversation near us died out. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline in my chest. "Excuse me?" I asked. Colleen did not look at me. She pointed a manicured finger at the chair Haven was sitting in. "This seat," she said, her voice projecting clearly over the low hum of chatter. "It is the best angle for the photos when the ball drops, and it is next to me. This seat is for the real granddaughter." The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. The real granddaughter. It wasn't an implication anymore. It was a declaration. Haven looked confused. She started to scoot back, her instincts telling her to flee, but she was trapped between the heavy table and the heavy chair. "Colleen," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. "She is a child. Do not do this." Colleen ignored me. She reached out and grabbed the back of Haven's chair. "Up," she commanded. "Move it. Sloane needs to sit." Haven tried to stand. She really did. I saw her little legs push against the floor, but she was tangled in the tablecloth, and she was scared, and she was not moving fast enough for Colleen. With a grunt of effort, Colleen yanked the chair backward. It happened in slow motion, and yet it happened so fast I could not stop it. The wooden legs of the chair caught on the thick carpet for a split second before giving way. Haven lost her balance. Her hand flailed out, grabbing the edge of the table, pulling the linen with her. There was a sickening thud as my daughter hit the hardwood floor. A crystal goblet shattered. A pitcher of ice water tipped over, sending a freezing cascade of water pouring down onto the table, dripping over the edge, and splashing onto Haven's legs where she lay sprawled on the ground. The room went dead silent. It was 10 minutes to midnight, but it felt like time had stopped completely. Haven lay there for a second, too stunned to cry. Then her face crumbled, and a small, terrified sob escaped her lips. I was out of my chair instantly. I dropped to my knees beside her. My beautiful girl. Her knee was already turning red where it had struck the floor. Her dress was soaked with ice water. She was trembling, not just from the cold, but from the shock of the violence. I checked her head. I checked her arms. I pulled her against my chest, shielding her from the room. And then I looked up. I looked at my father, Grant Bennett, the patriarch, the man who claimed family was everything. He was sitting 5 feet away. He had a glass of scotch in his hand. He looked at Haven on the floor, and then he looked at Colleen. He did not stand up. He did not shout. He took a sip of his drink and turned his head slightly to the left, studying the wallpaper as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. I looked at Dylan, my brother. He was holding Sloane, who was looking down at Haven with mild curiosity. Dylan offered a tight, grimacing smile, a shrug that said, "What can I do? She is crazy, you know that." I looked at the guests. the business partners, the cousins. They were all looking at their plates, or checking their phones, pretending that a grown woman had not just physically assaulted a child in the middle of a dinner party. It was a perfect tableau of cowardice. Colleen stood over us. She did not look sorry. She looked annoyed that the water had stained the tablecloth. She brushed a piece of lint off her dress and looked down at me with eyes that were as cold as the winter outside. "Oh, stop being dramatic. Marlo," she snapped. "She's fine. Just get her up and take her to the kitchen to dry off. And take the chair with you. We need the space for Sloane." She paused, and then she delivered the final blow, the one she had been saving up for years. "Get her out of my granddaughter's seat. She does not belong at the main table anyway." I felt something break inside me. It wasn't my heart. My heart had broken years ago regarding these people. It was something else. It was the tether, the heavy iron chain of obligation and hope that had bound me to this family for 3 decades, finally snapped. I stood up. I lifted Haven into my arms. She was heavy, too big to be carried, really, but I possessed a strength in that moment that had nothing to do with muscles. I wiped a smudge of dirt from her cheek. I smoothed her hair. I looked at Colleen. I did not scream. I did not throw a wine glass. I did not demand an apology that I knew would never come. I looked at her, and I recorded her face in my memory. I recorded the smug tilt of her lips. I recorded the way my father refused to meet my eyes. I recorded the silence of the room. "Okay," I said. My voice was soft. It was the calmest sound in the entire room. Colleen blinked, surprised by my lack of resistance. "Good," she said, turning her back to me to seat Sloane. "I will," I repeated. I turned around and walked toward the door. I did not stop to get my coat. I did not say goodbye. I walked out of the dining room, through the foyer, and out the front door into the freezing night. They thought I was fleeing. They thought I was running away to cry in my car, to lick my wounds, to come back in a few months when the sting had faded, begging for scraps of affection again. They thought they had won. But as I buckled Haven into the back seat and saw the dark bruise forming on her skin, I knew they were wrong. I wasn't leaving because I was defeated. I was leaving because the battlefield had just changed. They had just given me the one thing I had lacked for my entire life: absolute moral clarity. Colleen wanted us out of the seat. Fine. I would give her exactly what she asked for. I would remove myself, and my daughter, and my silence. And by the time I was done, there wouldn't be a table left for them to sit at, to understand why I walked out into the snow without a fight. You have to understand that silence was not something I chose that night. It was a language I had been fluent in for 28 years. It was a survival mechanism that I had perfected since I was 6 years old. The year my parents finalized their divorce, and my father decided that his new life with Colleen required a complete renovation of his old one. When my father married Colleen, I became a relic. I was a walking, talking reminder of a failed marriage, an artifact that did not fit the modern aesthetic Colleen was trying to curate. My father, Grant, did not stop loving me overnight, but his love became something quiet and apologetic. He loved me when Colleen was not looking. He loved me in the spaces between her demands. But the moment she entered the room, I could feel him receding, fading into the wallpaper, leaving me exposed to a woman who viewed affection as a finite resource that she refused to waste on another woman's child. The centerpiece of our family was North Pine Heritage Works. It was a custom furniture company that my grandmother, Ilara, had built with her own hands in the late 70s. She was the one who taught me the smell of sawdust and the difference between oak and walnut before I could even read. She used to tell me that wood had a memory, that it held the history of everything it had survived. When she died, the company passed to my father, but the soul of it seemed to evaporate. Under his watch, and increasingly under Colleen's influence, it became less about heritage and more about revenue streams and status. Then Dylan was born. If I was the rough draft, Dylan was the masterpiece. He was the son my father had always wanted, and the biological validation Colleen needed to cement her dominion over the household. The shift in resources was not subtle, it was seismic. I remember when I turned 16, I had spent months saving money from babysitting jobs to pay for half of a used Honda Civic. I presented the cash to my father, proud of my responsibility. He looked uncomfortable. He told me that money was tight, that the business was going through a lean quarter, and that he could not match my funds right now. I took the bus for another 2 years. 3 years later, when Dylan turned 16, a brand new truck appeared in the driveway with a red bow on the hood. It was fully paid for. When I asked about it, Colleen laughed, a tinkling sound that set my teeth on edge. She said, "Oh, Marlo, do not be jealous. A boy needs a truck for the business. He is the future of North Pine, after all." That was the narrative. Dylan was the future. I was the overhead cost. Dylan went to a private academy with tuition that cost more than my mother made in a year. I went to the local public high school. Dylan went to leadership camps in the summer. I worked double shifts at a diner. When it came time for college, I took out student loans that I'm still paying off today. Dylan's tuition was handled by a check from the company account, classified, I assume, under some vague business expense. But the cruelest cut was the company itself. I loved North Pine. I had applied to work there right after college, full of ideas about modernizing our catalog and reaching a younger demographic. My father hired me, but Colleen placed me. She put me in a windowless office in the back, handling data entry and filing. My job was to be invisible. Meanwhile, Dylan, who could not tell a dovetail joint from a nail gun, was given a custom workshop and the title of creative director before he had even finished his degree. Every time I tried to bring up the trust fund my grandmother had mentioned in her will, the one intended for all her grandchildren, I was shut down. I would sit in my father's study, surrounded by books he never read, and try to ask a simple question. "Dad, Grandma said there was something set aside for education or a first home." Before he could answer, Colleen would materialize. She had a radar for these conversations. She would place a hand on his shoulder, her nails digging into his sweater, and sigh. "Marlo, really? Your father is under so much pressure with the union negotiations. Do not burden him with your greed. The money is being managed for the long term. You will get your share when the time is right. Do you want to give him a heart attack?" So I stopped asking. I did not want to be the reason my father had a heart attack. I did not want to be the greedy daughter. I swallowed the unfairness because I thought that was the price of keeping a father. Then I made my own mistakes. I married a man I did not know well enough because I was desperate to build a family where I was the priority. It fell apart within 2 years. The divorce was messy and humiliating, and it left me as a single mother to Haven. I moved into a small apartment 20 minutes away from the estate, and I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. The family used my divorce as fresh ammunition. To them, it was proof that I was unstable, that I made bad choices, that I could not be trusted with responsibility or money. "Poor Marlo," Colleen would say to the relatives at Thanksgiving. "She just has such bad luck. We try to help, but you know how she is." I endured it all for Haven. I wanted my daughter to know her grandfather. I wanted her to have a sense of lineage. But I watched, year after year, as the cycle repeated itself. Haven became the new ghost. At Christmas, Sloan would receive mountains of gifts, electronic tablets, designer clothes, huge dollhouses. Haven would receive a sweater or a book, usually unwrapped or in a bag from a discount store. "We are putting money into a savings bond for her." Colleen would lie smoothly when Haven looked at the disparity with wide, sad eyes. "It is more responsible." In family photos, the photographer hired by Colleen would always arrange us the same way. Grant and Colleen in the center on chairs, Dylan and his wife standing directly behind them, Sloan on Colleen's lap, and me? I was always directed to the edge. "Just squeeze in on the side, Marlo," Colleen would direct, "and put Haven in front of you. No, further over. We need to see the mantle." We were accessories to their portrait of success. We were there to show that they were benevolent enough to include us, but not important enough to be centered. I should have screamed. I should have flipped the table years ago, but doubt is a powerful silencer. I always wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I was just jealous. Maybe the business really was struggling when I needed help, but thriving when Dylan did. Maybe I was not smart enough or talented enough. But there was one moment, about 8 months before the New Year's Eve incident, that planted a seed of cold suspicion in my gut. I was at the North Pine office late one evening, finishing up some filing that the regular secretary had neglected. The main office was dark, but the light was on in the archives room where the old paper records were kept before digitization. I was looking for a specific vendor contract from 5 years ago to resolve a dispute. I found the file, but as I pulled it out, another folder slipped from the shelf and spilled its contents onto the floor. I knelt to pick them up. They were invoices, old ones, but as I gathered them, a name caught my eye. Silver Creek Logistics. It was a consulting firm. The invoice was for $12,000, dated 7 years ago. The description was simply, advisory services. I frowned. I knew every legitimate vendor we used. We did not use logistics consultants. We had our own trucks. I flipped through the other papers. There were dozens of them. Invoices from companies with generic names like Apex Solutions and Blue River Holdings. They were all for vague services, management fees, retainer adjustments, strategic planning. And the amounts were consistent. $5,000 here, $8,000 there, just small enough to fly under the radar of a casual glance, but accumulated over time. They amounted to a fortune. I saw a transfer slip attached to one of the invoices. The handwriting on the authorization line was familiar. It was not my father's cramped, messy scrawl. It was sharp, angular, and aggressive. It looked like Colleen's. My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat on the dusty floor of the archive room, holding a piece of paper that felt like a burning coal. If this was what I thought it wasn't just unfairness, it was theft, it was embezzlement. But then the fear kicked in. Who would believe me? I was the bitter, divorced daughter working an admin job. Colleen was the respectable matriarch. If I brought this to my father without concrete proof, without a full paper trail, Colleen would spin it. She would say I was paranoid. She would say I was trying to frame her out of jealousy. She would convince my father to fire me. And then I would lose the only steady income I had. I would lose the health insurance North Pine provided for Haven. I imagined the look on my father's face, not anger at her, but disappointment in me. I imagined being cut off completely, unable to let Haven see her grandfather ever again. So I put the papers back, I shoved them into the folder and jammed it back onto the shelf. I turned off the light and walked out to my car, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I told myself I was protecting Haven. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but deep down, I knew the truth. I was afraid. I was afraid that even if I proved she was stealing, my father would still choose her. I was afraid that my value in his eyes was so low that even a crime wouldn't tip the scales. So I swallowed the secret. I let it sit in my stomach like a stone, heavy and sharp. I watched them buy new cars and renovate the kitchen while I clipped coupons for groceries. I watched them treat my daughter like a charity case while they funneled family money into shell companies. I waited for a sign. I waited for a moment where the cost of silence finally outweighed the cost of war. I did not know it then, but I was waiting for a chair to be pulled out from under an 8-year-old girl. I was waiting for the physical manifestation of what they had been doing to us financially and emotionally for decades. That night in the archive room, I had left the evidence in the dark, but I had not forgotten where it was. And as I drove away from the New Year's party, the memory of those file names, Silver Creek, Apex, Blue River, came flooding back to me, clear as day. I had been too scared to look closer back then. I wasn't scared anymore. The doubt was gone. The hope for my father's love was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard realization that I had been protecting the very people who were robbing my daughter of her future. And that ended tonight. The drive back to our apartment was the longest 20 minutes of my life. The heater in my old sedan rattled against the silence, a stark contrast to the heavy, suffocating quiet that had filled the dining room just moments before. In the rearview mirror, I watched Haven staring out the window. She was not crying anymore. She was just holding her knee, her eyes wide and processing a lesson no 8-year-old should ever have to learn: that the people who share your blood are not always the people who have your back. When we got inside, I did not turn on the main lights. I kept the apartment dim, illuminated only by the street lamps outside and the soft glow of the hallway nightlight. I carried Haven to the bathroom and sat her on the edge of the tub. I wet a washcloth with cold water and wrapped it around a bag of frozen peas. "Does it hurt bad?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It stings a little," she said. "Mom? Did I sit in the wrong chair? Was it reserved?" My chest tightened so hard I thought a rib might snap. I knelt on the bath mat so I was eye level with her. I took her small hands in mine. "No, baby, you did not do anything wrong. That chair was just a chair, and you have every right to sit anywhere you want. Do you hear me? You did nothing wrong." She nodded, but I could see the doubt lingering in her eyes. Colleen's voice had been loud. Colleen's authority had been absolute. It would take more than one conversation to undo the damage of tonight, but I would spend the rest of my life undoing it if I had to. I read her a story, but I do not think either of us was listening to the words. Once her breathing evened out and she drifted into a restless sleep. I closed her bedroom door. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Usually, this was the time I would call my best friend, or maybe I would pour a glass of cheap wine and cry until the humiliation washed away. I would tell myself to be the bigger person. I would tell myself to keep the peace for the sake of the family. But the peace was gone. It had shattered on the dining room floor along with that crystal goblet. I walked into my bedroom and opened the closet. On the top shelf, behind a stack of winter sweaters I rarely wore, was a small, heavy metal box. It was fireproof, dented at the corners, and smelled faintly of lavender and cedar. It had belonged to my grandmother, Ilara, 2 days before she died. She had pressed this box into my hands. She was weak then, her voice raspy, but her grip had been surprisingly strong. "Keep this," she had told me. "Do not open it unless you feel like you are drowning, unless you have nowhere else to go." For years, I had left it alone. I thought I was managing. I thought I was keeping my head above water. But tonight, I realized I had been drowning for a decade. I took the box to the kitchen table. I dialed the combination, my birthday, and the latch clicked open with a heavy mechanical thud. Inside, there was no jewelry, there was no cash. There was a single flash drive, an older model, thick and silver, and a handwritten note on cream-colored stationery. I picked up the note. My grandmother's handwriting was looped and elegant, a relic of a time when penmanship mattered. "Marlowe," it read, "I built this family on wood and honesty. I fear one of those is rotting. If you ever have to choose between a fake peace and the truth, choose the truth. It is the only thing that does not decay." I felt a chill run down my spine. She knew, even back then, she had sensed the shift. She had seen Colleen's ambition and my father's weakness. I opened my laptop and plugged in the drive. The screen flickered as the folders loaded. It was not just a few documents, it was an archive. There were scans of the original trust fund charters, PDF copies of emails from her personal account, and digital records of board meetings from the year leading up to her death. I clicked on a folder labeled Trust Structure. I knew the general idea of the trust. It was supposed to be a locked fund, meant to provide a safety net for all the grandchildren, educational expenses, first home down payments, medical emergencies. The principal was supposed to remain untouched, generating interest that would be reinvested. I opened the document titled Fund Distribution Rules. Clause 4, Section B. I read aloud to the empty kitchen. "No withdrawals shall be made for company operations, personal debts, or lifestyle maintenance of the trustees." I opened another window on my browser and logged into the bank portal I still had access to. As an administrative assistant, I did not have full clearance, but I had the login for the general ledger to file expense reports. It was a low-level access, but it was enough to see the transaction history if you knew where to look. I started comparing. I pulled up the trust's activity for the last 5 years. On the surface, It looked legitimate. There were line items for administrative costs and portfolio management, but the numbers were wrong. According to my grandmother's original charter, the management fee was capped at 1% annually. I looked at the withdrawal from last January. It was listed as management fee, Apex Capital. The amount was $12,000. I did the math. The trust was substantial, but $12,000 was nearly 4% of the liquid cash available that quarter. I kept scrolling. March, reinvestment strategy, Blue River Holdings, $8,500. June, asset protection retainer, Silver Creek Logistics, $15,000. The names, they were the same names I had seen on the invoices in the dusty archive room months ago. Silver Creek, Blue River, Apex. They were using the trust fund to pay the fake vendors. I felt a surge of nausea, followed immediately by a rush of cold, sharp clarity. They were not just stealing from the company profits. They were draining the inheritance my grandmother had left for me and Haven. They were looting the future to pay for their present. I opened a new spreadsheet. I named it simply The Evidence. I began to build a timeline. I started with the date of my grandmother's death. Then I logged every single suspicious transaction I could find on the ledger and matched it to the vendors listed on the trust withdrawals. Year 1. Dylan gets a new truck. 2 weeks prior. A withdrawal of $30,000 from the trust for capital equipment acquisition via a shell company. Year 3. The family goes to Europe for a month. A withdrawal of $25,000 for international market research. Year 5. Dylan's wedding. A massive withdrawal of $50,000 labeled legal retainer for merger exploration. There was no merger. There was never a merger. It was a roadmap of their greed. They had treated the trust fund like a personal piggy bank, labeling every theft with a business term to hide it from the tax man and from me. I worked for hours. The only sound in the apartment was the clicking of my keyboard. I did not feel tired. I felt electrified. For the first time in my life, the confusion was gone. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't jealous. I was the victim of a systematic, decade-long fraud. I clicked on a folder on the USB drive labeled Legal Contacts. Inside was a scanned letter from a law firm in Philadelphia. The letterhead read, Voss and Associates. The letter was addressed to my grandmother, confirming the finalization of the trust terms. Dear Alara, it said, I have locked these terms as tightly as the law allows. If anyone tries to breach them, the fail-safe clause will activate. Call me if you ever suspect Grant is wavering. The signature at the bottom was Eldon Voss. I quickly searched the name on the internet. Eldon Voss. He was still practicing. His firm was smaller now, located in a historic building in Philadelphia, but he was active. He specialized in estate litigation and fraud. I looked at the clock on my laptop screen. It was 3:12 in the morning. My father and Colleen were probably asleep in their 400 thread count sheets, confident that I was at home crying into my pillow. They thought they had crushed me. They thought the humiliation at the dinner table was the end of the story. I opened my email client. I composed a new message. To Eldon Voss. Subject, Estate of Alara Bennett. Urgent inquiry regarding trust mismanagement. My fingers hovered over the keys. This was the point of no return. Once I sent this, I could not take it back. I would be declaring war on my father. I would be risking my job, my reputation, and the tiny scrap of relationship I had left with them. I looked at the bedroom door where Haven was sleeping. I thought about the way she had looked at me when I put the ice on her knee. Did I sit in the wrong chair? No, she didn't sit in the wrong chair. She sat in a nest of vipers, and it was my job to clear the nest. I typed, Dear Mr. Voss, my name is Marlo Bennett, granddaughter of Alara Bennett. I am writing to you because I have reason to believe the irrevocable trust established by my grandmother is being systematically drained in violation of the original charter. I have attached 5 documents for your review. They include a timeline of withdrawals labeled as vendor payments to non-existent entities, a comparison of management fees versus the capped limit in the charter, and a log of corresponding personal expenditures by the trustees. I need to verify if you still hold the original authority to audit the fund. If you do, I would like to formally request an investigation. Sincerely, Marlo Bennett. I attached the spreadsheet. I attached the scans of the fake invoices. I attached the PDF of the original charter from the USB. The files were heavy. The progress bar moved slowly across the screen. Blue, blue, blue. Done. I hit send. The whoosh sound of the email departing felt louder than a gunshot in the quiet room. I sat back in my chair. The screen went dark as the laptop went into sleep mode, leaving me in the shadows of the kitchen. For the first time in 20 years, I did not feel the crushing weight of anxiety in my chest. I did not feel the need to apologize for existing. I sat there in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside, and I realized something terrifying and wonderful. I wasn't afraid of them anymore. They had spent so much time making sure I was afraid of their power that they had forgotten to be afraid of my memory. They had given me a front row seat to their corruption, because they thought I was too stupid to understand what I was seeing. I looked at the empty chair across the table. You wanted the seat, Colleen. I thought, you can have it, but you are going to pay for the privilege. I closed the laptop, stood up, and went to check on my daughter one last time. Tomorrow, the sun would rise on a new year, and for the Bennett family, it was going to be the beginning of the end. The sun rose on New Year's Day with a deceptive brightness. It was the kind of crisp, white winter morning that usually signaled fresh starts and resolutions. But in my apartment, the air felt heavy with the anticipation of a storm. I was in the kitchen making pancakes for Haven, trying to act as if our lives had not fundamentally shifted on their axis 8 hours ago. Haven was sitting at the counter, her leg propped up on a chair, the bruise on her knee now a blooming shade of purple and yellow. She was watching a cartoon, munching on a piece of bacon, when the knock came. It was not a polite knock. It was a series of rapid, authoritative pounds that rattled the cheap wood of my front door. I did not have to look through the peephole to know who it was. I turned off the stove, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and looked at Haven. Stay here, honey, I said, keeping my voice light. Put your headphones on. She looked at me, fear flickering in her eyes, but she obeyed. She slid the large headphones over her ears, drowning out the world. I walked to the door and opened it. My father, Grant, and my stepmother, Colleen, were standing in the hallway. They looked like they had not slept. My father's eyes were bloodshot, and he was wearing a cashmere coat over a wrinkled shirt. Colleen, however, was dressed for battle in a sharp black coat. Her hair sprayed into a helmet of perfection, her lips painted a severe crimson. They did not wait to be invited in. Colleen pushed past me, her heels clicking aggressively on my linoleum floor. Grant followed, closing the door behind him with a softness that felt more like a trap sealing shut than a courtesy. We need to talk, Colleen announced. She did not look at the kitchen. She did not look at the living room. And most tellingly, she did not look at Haven. She did not ask if the 8-year-old girl she had shoved onto the floor the night before was okay. She did not offer an apology. Her eyes were laser-focused on me, burning with a mixture of rage and panic. You have crossed a line. Marlo, she hissed. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. I felt a strange sense of calm. Usually, when Colleen raised her voice, I shrank. Today, I just felt like I was watching a bad actor recite lines from a script I had already read. Happy New Year to you too, I said. Do not get smart with me, she snapped. We got an alert, a notification from the bank, and an email from that dinosaur. Eldon Voss, what do you think you're doing? She stepped closer, invading my personal space. The smell of her expensive perfume, which used to intimidate me, now just smelled like desperation. You have no right to touch private family papers. She continued, you are a low-level assistant. You do not have clearance for the trust data. That is theft. Marlo, that is corporate espionage. I looked at my father. He was standing by the coat rack, wringing his leather gloves in his hands. He looked old. Dad, I asked, do you have anything to say? Maybe ask how your granddaughter is walking today? Grant flinched. He looked at Colleen, then at me. "Marlo, please," he said, his voice raspy. "You are making this very difficult. We are a family. You cannot just send legal threats to your own people on a holiday. It looks bad." "It looks bad?" I repeated. "You watched your wife assault my daughter, and you did nothing. That looked bad." "Dad, what I did was just paperwork." Colleen slammed her hand onto my small dining table, making the salt shaker jump. "Stop deflecting. You accessed the trust files. You sent confidential information to a third party. We can have you arrested for this. We can have you fired and blacklisted before lunch." I looked her dead in the eye. "Then do it," I said. The room went silent. Colleen blinked, taken aback. She was used to me begging. She was used to me apologizing. "If I committed a crime, call the police," I said, my voice steady. "If I stole something, prove it. But we both know I did not steal anything. I just turned on the lights." Then, the door opened again. It was unlocked, and my half-brother Dylan burst in. He was wearing a tracksuit, looking disheveled and frantic. He didn't even look at me. He went straight to Grant. "Dad, the vendor portal is locked," he said, his voice pitching high with stress. "I tried to approve the transfer for the new lumber shipment, and it gave me a compliance error. It says the account is under audit review." Colleen spun around. "What?" she shrieked. Dylan looked at me then, his face twisting into a sneer. "You did this," he accused, pointing a finger at me. "You froze the accounts? Do you have any idea what you are doing? You are going to stall production. You are destroying the business." I did not freeze anything. "Dylan," I said, "I just asked a lawyer a question." Dylan laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "A question? You are trying to ruin us because you are jealous. This is about last night, isn't it? You are mad because Sloane is the favorite. You are mad because you are a failure and I am the success. So you want to burn it all down." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the fear behind the arrogance. He wasn't worried about production. He was worried about the money. He was worried about the transfers that paid for his lifestyle. I shrugged. "If the books are clean—" "Dylan, why are you afraid of a little reading? If every penny is where it is supposed to be, an audit will be over in 2 days. Why are you sweating?" No one answered. The silence that followed was heavy with guilt. Then, my father's phone began to ring. It was a jarring, loud ringtone that echoed in the small apartment. He pulled it out, looked at the screen, and his face went pale. "It is the bank," he whispered. "It is the fraud department." "Answer it. Grant," Colleen ordered. "Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them a disgruntled employee hacked the system." Grant held the phone like it was a grenade. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Marlo, call Voss. Tell him to stop. We can work this out. I can write you a check. For Haven, for her tuition. Whatever you want. Just stop this before it gets out." It was the most insulting thing he could have said. He was trying to buy my silence with the same money they had stolen from me. I shook my head. "No deal." "Dad?" Grant turned away, answering the phone in a hushed, frantic whisper. "Yes, this is Grant Bennett." "No, I did not authorize a freeze. What do you mean, suspicious patterns?" Colleen watched him, her jaw tight. When she realized he was losing control of the conversation, she turned back to me. The mask of concerned family member dropped completely, replaced by pure venom. "You are going to regret this," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You think you are smart? You are a nobody. We have lawyers who eat people like you for breakfast. By the time we are done, you won't just be unemployed. You will be unemployable. We will ruin your reputation in this town. We will make sure everyone knows you are a vindictive, unstable liar who tried to extort her own father." Dylan was already on his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen. "I am posting it now," he muttered, mostly to himself, but loud enough for me to hear. "Everyone needs to know what a snake you are." I watched him. I did not try to grab his phone. I did not scream at him to stop. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was crafting the narrative. He was posting on the local community pages, the business forums, the family group chats. "My sister has lost her mind," he would say. "She is attacking the family business because she needs money." He looked up at me, a smirk playing on his lips. "Sent," he said. "Good luck showing your face at the grocery store. Marlowe." I didn't flinch. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my own phone. I opened the social media app. There it was, a picture of Dylan and Sloane, looking angelic, with a caption about family loyalty and protecting our legacy from greedy relatives. I didn't comment. I didn't react. I simply took a screenshot. Then I opened my messages. I saw a text from a cousin asking if I was okay because Dylan was saying crazy things. I took a screenshot of that too. I documented it. Every word, every lie, every threat. Colleen noticed my lack of reaction. It unsettled her. She expected a fight. She expected tears. My silence was a weapon she didn't know how to parry. "Come on, Grant," she snapped at my father, who was still arguing with the bank representative. "We are leaving. We will handle this from the office." She walked to the door, then paused. She turned back to me one last time, her hand on the doorknob. "You will not be able to handle the pressure." "Marlowe," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You are weak. You always have been. You crumble when things get hard. That is why you are alone." She opened the door, letting the cold air rush in again. I looked her in the eyes, and for the first time in my life, I saw her not as a giant, but as a terrified woman trying to hold on to a crumbling castle. "You are wrong, Colleen," I said. She paused, waiting for me to beg. "I have been handling the pressure of being your punching bag for 20 years. I continued, my voice clear and strong. "I have raised a daughter alone while you treated us like dirt. I survived a divorce, poverty, and your cruelty. I am the strongest person in this room." I took a step forward, and she actually took a step back. "I have endured it all my life," I said. "Now, it is your turn." I slammed the door in her face. I locked the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door and listened. I heard their footsteps retreating down the hall. I heard Dylan cursing. I heard my father trying to explain something to the bank. I went back to the kitchen. Haven had taken off her headphones. She was looking at me with big, worried eyes. "Was that Grandma Colleen?" she asked. "Yes, baby." "Is she mad?" I picked up the spatula and flipped a pancake. It was perfectly golden brown. "Yes, she is mad," I said, "but that is okay. Sometimes, people get mad when they get caught doing bad things." I put the pancake on a plate and set it in front of my daughter. "Eat up," I said. "We have a lot of work to do." I sat down opposite her, picked up my phone, and opened a new folder in my gallery. I named it Harassment Evidence. I saved the screenshots of Dylan's post. I saved the text messages that were starting to roll in from confused relatives. They wanted a war. They wanted to bury me under social pressure and legal threats. They thought that by making noise, they could drown out the truth. But they had forgotten one thing. Noise does not change the numbers, and the numbers were on my side. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who looked bored with the destruction he was handing out. He did not say a word, just shoved the thick packet into my hands, checked a box on his clipboard, and walked back to his idling car. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had discovered the truth just 48 hours prior, and opened the seal. It was not a warning. It was a bombardment. My father and stepmother were suing me. The legal language was dense, designed to intimidate, but the gist was clear. They were accusing me of tortious interference with business relations, defamation of character, and breach of fiduciary confidentiality. They claimed my email to Eldon Voss had caused irreparable harm to the reputation of North Pine Heritage Works. They were seeking damages in the amount of $250,000. $250,000. I laughed, a dry, hollow sound that bounced off the walls of my small apartment. I did not have $250 in my savings account, let alone $250,000. They knew that. The number was not real. It was a leash. Clipped behind the lawsuit was a second document, printed on heavy, creamy paper. It was titled Family Settlement Agreement. It was the carrot to the lawsuit's stick. The agreement stated that if I signed immediately, the lawsuit would be dropped. In exchange, I had to formally admit that my accusations were the result of mental distress and misunderstanding. I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement that would silence me for life regarding any financial matters of the Bennett family, and most painfully, I had to agree to a restraining order that would keep me 500 feet away from the company offices and the family estate. Basically, they wanted me to agree that I was crazy, that they were innocent, and that I would disappear forever. I was still staring at the papers, feeling the bile rise in my throat, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I did not recognize, but the tone was unmistakable. Think about Haven. Do you want her to visit her mother in jail for debt? Sign the paper. I dropped the phone as if it were hot. The room suddenly felt very small. The walls seemed to be inching closer, pressing the air out of my lungs. This was not just a dispute anymore. This was a siege. Later that afternoon, a car pulled up to my building. I watched from the window as my father, Grant, stepped out. He was alone. Colleen was nowhere to be seen. He looked smaller than I remembered. His shoulders hunched against the winter wind. I let him in because a part of me, the stupid, childish part that still wanted a daddy, hoped he had come to apologize. He did not take off his coat. He stood in my living room, looking around at my second-hand furniture, his eyes full of a pity that made my skin crawl. "Marlo," he said softly, "please, just end this." I pointed to the papers on the table. "End it? You are suing me for $250,000. Dad, you are trying to bankrupt me because I asked a question." Grant sighed. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a photograph. It was an old Polaroid, slightly faded. It showed me and Dylan when we were kids, sitting in a treehouse my grandfather had built. Dylan was laughing, and I had my arm around his shoulder, protecting him. "We used to be happy." "Marlo," my father said, his voice trembling, "why do you want to destroy the family name? My mother built that company. Do you think she would want this? Do you think she would want her granddaughter tearing it apart?" The manipulation was so clumsy it was almost tragic. He was using the memory of the very woman they were robbing to guilt me into silence. "Grandma left me a note." "Dad," I said, my voice cold. "She told me to choose the truth. You are the one tearing her legacy apart. You are letting Colleen loot the trust fund." Grant flinched. He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "You do not understand business. Marlo, it is complicated. Cash flow is tricky. We just moved some things around. We were going to put it back." "Going to." That was the liar's favorite tense. "I am not signing that agreement. Grant," I said, "I am not admitting to lies I did not tell." He looked at me then, and the pity in his eyes hardened into something resigning. "Then you leave us no choice," he said. "We have to protect ourselves. And Marlo? People in this town talk. Once they hear what you are doing to your own brother, you are going to find it very lonely out here." He left the photo on the table and walked out. He was right about the talking. The social isolation began the next morning at the school drop-off. Ridgewater was a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, but usually, they pretended not to. Today, the pretense was gone. When I walked Haven to the gate, I saw two mothers I usually chatted with. I smiled and started to wave. They saw me, exchanged a look, and immediately turned their backs, engrossed in a sudden, fascinating conversation about the weather. I walked past them, my head high, but my ears were burning. "I heard she's trying to blackmail them." A whisper floated from a group near the entrance. "Jealousy is an ugly thing," another voice murmured. I checked my phone once I was back in the car. Dylan had been busy. He had posted a picture on his social media profile. It was a photo of him holding Sloane's hand, walking through the snow. The caption read, "Family is the only legacy that matters. It breaks my heart when greed makes people forget where they came from. We will stand strong against the lies. Bennett Strong." Truthful. Ow. He did not name me. He did not have to. The comment section was full of people tagging me, asking what was wrong with me, calling me ungrateful. I can't believe she would do that to Grant. One comment read, "After everything he gave her." I felt a wave of dizziness. They were rewriting reality in real time. In their version of the story, I was the villain. I was the bitter, unsuccessful sister trying to cash in on her brother's hard work. They were weaponizing their popularity and their money to paint me as a pariah. I drove home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The silence in my phone was deafening. No one called to ask my side of the story. No one texted to see if I was okay. The friends I thought I had were suddenly very busy or very scared of crossing the Bennett family. That evening, I received another message. This one was not a text. It was a direct message on a social media app from an anonymous account with no profile picture. "You are playing a dangerous game. Accidents happen. Kids fall down all the time. Do not make it worse for her." I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. Kids fall down all the time. They were mocking me. They were using the moment Colleen hurt my daughter as a threat to hurt her again. I sat on the floor of my living room, the phone clutched in my hand. For a moment, I broke. I truly broke. I sobbed into my knees, terrified. Was I doing the right thing? Was this worth it? If I signed the paper, the threats would stop. The lawsuit would go away. I could move to another town, start over, keep Haven safe. I looked at the settlement agreement again. The pen was right there. It would be so easy to just sign my name and make the pain stop. Then, I closed my eyes. I saw the dining room. I saw the crystal glass shattering. I saw Haven's face. Not the fear, but the confusion. Did I sit in the wrong chair? If I signed that paper, I was telling her that yes, she did sit in the wrong chair. I would be teaching her that when powerful people bully you, you should apologize. I would be teaching her that her safety was dependent on her submission. I opened my eyes. I was done crying. I did not need friends who would turn on me based on a Facebook caption. I did not need a father who would threaten me with poverty to cover his wife's crimes. I needed a lawyer. But not just any lawyer. Colleen and Grant had hired a firm known for loud, aggressive litigation. They wanted a spectacle. They wanted to scream in court. I needed the opposite. I needed a surgeon. I spent the next 4 hours researching. I did not look for family law. I looked for forensic accounting and complex asset recovery. I found a name, Elias Thorne. His website looked like it had not been updated since the late 90s. There were no photos of him smiling, no slogans about fighting for you, just a list of credentials in accounting and law, and a list of cases he had won. They were all boring, complicated financial fraud cases. I called the number. It was 7 in the evening, but he answered on the second ring. "Thorne," a gravelly voice said. "Mr. Thorne, my name is Marlowe Bennett. My family is suing me for defamation because I found evidence they are embezzling from a trust fund. They want a media war. I have spreadsheets." There was a long pause on the other end. I heard the sound of a page turning. "Spreadsheets?" he asked. 5 years of them, I said, cross-referenced with fake vendor invoices. I heard a sound that might have been a chuckle, dry and dusty. "I do not do media wars. Ms. Bennett, I do not do emotional speeches to the jury." "I do not want a speech," I said. "I want an audit." "Be at my office at 8 tomorrow morning," he said. "Bring the paper. Leave the drama at the door." I hung up. I walked over to the table where the settlement agreement lay. I picked it up. I walked to the kitchen sink, struck a match, and set the corner of the document on fire. I watched it burn, the creamy paper turning to black ash, the legal threats curling up and disappearing into smoke. They wanted to isolate me. They wanted to use the court of public opinion to crush me. They thought that because I was alone, I was weak. But they had made a critical error. They had forced me into a corner where I had nothing left to lose. And a person with nothing to lose is the most dangerous enemy they could ever make. I swept the ashes into the sink and washed them away. Tomorrow, I would not go to the court to defend myself against their lies. I would go to the court to ask for the one thing they could not spin, could not bully, and could not hide. I was going to ask for the numbers, and the numbers never lied. The silence from my phone, which had felt like a punishment the day before, was broken on Wednesday morning, but it wasn't a threat from a stranger or a hateful comment from a neighbor. It was a single text message from a number I had not saved, but recognized immediately. I have what you need. Meet me at the Double T Diner on Route 9. Noon. Come alone. The sender was Noah Calder. Noah was my father's second cousin on the Bennett side. For 15 years, he had been the production manager at North Pine Heritage Works. He was the man who actually knew how the furniture was made. A man with sawdust permanently etched into his fingerprints. 2 years ago, he had been quietly let go. The official story from Colleen was that Noah had failed to adapt to modern efficiency standards. I had always assumed that meant he didn't know how to use the new software. Now, I suspected it meant he refused to learn how to steal. I drove to the diner, a chrome and neon relic sitting in the dead space between Ridgewater and the next town over. It was the kind of place where truck drivers stopped for coffee and pie, a place where the Bennett name held no currency. Noah was sitting in a booth in the back, nursing a black coffee. He looked older than I remembered. His hair had gone completely gray, and the lines around his eyes were deep trenches of stress. When he saw me, he didn't smile. He just slid a thick manila envelope across the scratched laminate table. "You are kicking the hornet's nest. Marlowe," he said, his voice rough like sandpaper. "They kicked my daughter first." "Noah," I replied, sitting down. He nodded slowly. "I heard about that. Colleen always did have a mean streak, but I didn't think Grant would let it get that bad." "Grant lets everything happen," I said bitterly. "That is his specialty." Noah tapped the envelope. "I saw the post Dylan put up, calling you greedy, calling you a liar." I sat in my kitchen and I thought about the day they fired me. I thought about how they told me I was obsolete, and I decided I was tired of keeping their secrets. I opened the clasp. Inside, there were no spreadsheets. These were copies of physical contracts, purchase orders, and emails printed on standard office paper. "Look at the third page," was so instructed. I pulled out a purchase order dated 3 years ago. It was for raw walnut timber. "The unit price," Noah said. "Look at it." I read the number. It seemed high, but I wasn't an expert on timber prices. "That is 40% above market rate for that year," Noah explained, reading my confusion. "We used to buy from a local mill in Oregon. Great wood, fair price. Then Colleen took over the vendor management. She canceled the contract with the Oregon mill, said they were unreliable. She forced us to switch to a new supplier." I looked at the vendor name on the invoice, Silver Creek Logistics. My stomach dropped. It was the same name I had found in the trust fund withdrawals, the same name on the fake invoices in the archive. "Silver Creek is not a lumber mill," Noah said. "They are a broker, a middleman. They buy the wood from the same Oregon mill we used to use, mark up the price by 40%, and sell it to North Pine." "But why?" I asked, though I was starting to understand. "Why increase the company's costs? That hurts the profit margin." "It hurts the company's profit," Noah corrected. "But look at the email stapled to the back." I flipped the page. It was an email from the director of Silver Creek to a private email address. The address was G. Bennett Personal. "Consulting fee for the quarter has been processed." The email read, 15% of the gross transaction value. They were skimming. Noah said, "They overpay the vendor using company money. The vendor takes their cut, and then kicks back 15% to Grant and Colleen personally. It bypasses the company books, it bypasses the shareholders, and it definitely bypasses the trust fund." "It is a washing machine," I whispered. "Exactly. And it wasn't just wood. It was the varnish, the shipping crates, the upholstery fabric. They fired every honest supplier we had worked with for 20 years. Good people, family businesses. They cut them all loose and replaced them with these shell companies." Noah leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I have 2 of the old suppliers ready to talk. Marlowe, the owner of the fabric mill in mental distress because he lost the North Pine contract. He still has the emails from Colleen demanding a renegotiation fee that he refused to pay. He will testify. I looked at the stack of papers. This was not just mismanagement. This was racketeering. "Why are you giving this to me now?" I asked. Noah looked out the window at the gray parking lot. "Because my pension was tied to the company stock," he said, "and ever since they started this scheme, the stock value has been flatlining while they buy new cars. They are stealing from my retirement to pay for their country club memberships, and because—" He paused. "Because I saw what they did to Haven. A man who lets a child get hurt to protect his ego does not deserve to run my grandmother's company." I put the papers back in the envelope. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the ammunition I now held. "Thank you, Noah." I got up to leave, but my phone rang. I checked the screen. It was a Philadelphia area code. I answered it right there in the diner. "This is Marlowe." "Ms. Bennett, this is Eldon Voss." The voice was old, dry, and sharp as a tack. It sounded like Judgment Day. "Mr. Voss," I said, my heart hammering, "did you get my email?" "I did," he said, "and I have spent the last 24 hours reviewing the trust activity with my internal auditor." I held my breath. "Ms. Bennett, your grandmother, Elara, was a very suspicious woman. She anticipated that your father might be weak, and she anticipated that his wife might be ambitious." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "The trust charter has a specific clause," Voss continued, Clause 7, Section C. "It is what we call a bad actor provision. It states that if the primary trustee, that is your father, is found to be using the trust assets for personal enrichment or acting in bad faith, he is not just removed." "What happens?" I asked. "The trusteeship dissolves immediately," Voss said, "and control of the assets, including the voting shares of North Pine Heritage Works, held by the trust, transfers to the primary beneficiary who first identified the breach." I stood frozen in the middle of the diner. "That would be you, Marlowe," Voss added. I felt the blood drain from my face. "If we can prove this fraud in a court of law," Voss said, his voice dropping an octave, "your father does not just lose the money, he loses the company, and you become the majority shareholder." I hung up the phone a minute later. I walked out to my car, but I did not get in immediately. I stood in the cold wind, clutching the envelope Noah had given me. For a moment, I did not feel triumph. I did not feel the thrill of victory. I felt a profound, aching grief. I thought about my student loans. I thought about the nights I ate instant noodles so Haven could have fresh fruit. I thought about the time my car broke down, and I had to beg my father for $200 to fix the alternator. And he gave me a lecture on fiscal responsibility before handing me the cash. They had millions. They had millions of dollars sitting in that trust, and millions more flowing through these fake vendor contracts. And they had watched me struggle. They had watched me count coupons. They had watched me cry over heating bills. It wasn't that they couldn't help me. It was that they were too busy stealing the money that was rightfully mine to care. They had bent my entire life, warped my reality, to feed their greed. I got into my car and drove straight to Elias Thorne's office. When I walked in, Thorne was sitting behind a desk buried in paperwork. He looked up, his glasses reflecting the fluorescent light. I put Noah's envelope on his desk. "What is this?" he asked. "That is the smoking gun," I said. Then I sat down and looked him in the eye. "And I just got off the phone with the estate lawyer. We are not just asking for an audit. Elias." Thorne raised an eyebrow. "What are we doing?" "We are filing for an emergency injunction," I said, my voice steady and cold. "We are freezing every asset they have, the house, the cars, the accounts, and then we are filing to trigger the bad actor clause." Thorne picked up the envelope and opened it. He scanned the first contract, then the email. A slow, shark-like smile spread across his face. "You want to take the company," he said. I looked at the picture of Haven I kept as my phone wallpaper. "I want to take back what they stole," I said. "File the motion. Today." Thorne reached for his phone. "I will have it on the judge's desk by 4 o'clock." I leaned back in the leather chair. The silence in the room wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy with the approaching storm. My family thought they were fighting a scared single mother who wanted an apology. They had no idea they were about to face the new owner of their world. The legal system, I discovered, does not move with the speed of a Hollywood drama. It moves with the grinding, unstoppable force of a glacier. Elias Thorne filed the motion for a temporary injunction and request for court-appointed oversight at 9 in the morning on Thursday. By 2 in the afternoon, the world of North Pine Heritage Works began to shrink. It started quietly. Thorne called me to let me know that the bank had flagged 3 of the company's primary operating accounts. The algorithms that monitor for fraud had been triggered by the sudden scrutiny, and they had placed a hold for review on all outgoing transfers exceeding $5,000. For a company that moved raw timber and finished furniture by the truckload, a $5,000 cap was not just an inconvenience, it was a tourniquet cutting off the blood supply. I sat in Thorne's conference room, surrounded by boxes of files that Noah had provided, and the new data that was trickling in from the electronic discovery request. The room smelled of old paper and stale coffee. Thorne was on the speakerphone with the bank's legal department, his voice a low, gravelly drone that sounded incredibly reassuring. "They are claiming it is a clerical error," Thorne said to me after he hung up, "but the bank is not buying it. They have seen the invoices from Silver Creek. They want to know why a furniture company in Pennsylvania is paying a logistics firm in Nevada for consulting, when that firm does not seem to own a single truck." I looked at the spreadsheet on the table. The numbers were staggering. It wasn't just the petty theft I had initially suspected. It was a systematic siphoning. Later that afternoon, the second domino fell. One of North Pine's biggest retail partners, a national chain that bought our mid-range dining sets, sent a formal request for clarification. Apparently, the rumors of the lawsuit and the frozen accounts had reached their credit department. They were refusing to issue the new letter of credit for the spring shipment until the governance issues were resolved. That was the polite business way of saying, "We heard you are robbing the register, and we are not giving you any more money until we know who is actually in charge." The silence from my family changed quality. The aggressive noise from the previous days vanished, replaced by a terrified vacuum. I checked Dylan's social media. The post about me being a snake and a liar was gone. In fact, his entire feed had been scrubbed of anything controversial. Instead, he had posted a generic photo of a sunset over the lumberyard with a caption that read, "Focusing on the positive, grateful for another day of hard work." He was not posting that because he had found inner peace. He was posting it because a lawyer had screamed at him to shut his mouth. He was trying to look stable. He was trying to look like a victim who was taking the high road, rather than a co-conspirator who had been caught red-handed. Then came the bribe. It arrived via a courier, a thick envelope addressed to me personally. It was not from a lawyer. It was handwritten on Colleen's personal stationery. I opened it in my kitchen, wearing rubber gloves, as if the paper itself might be toxic. "Marlowe." The note began, the handwriting shaky. "We are all hurting. This has gone too far. We are willing to offer you a one-time settlement of $50,000 to cover your legal fees and Haven's tuition, provided we meet privately, without lawyers, to sign a cessation of hostilities. We are a family. Let us handle this at the dinner table, not in court." I read it twice. $50,000. A week ago, that amount of money would have changed my life. It would have paid off my student loans. It would have fixed my car. It would have bought Haven a wardrobe where the clothes actually fit. But now it just looked like an insult. It was hush money, and the fact that she wanted to meet without lawyers told me everything I needed to know. She wanted to bully me. She wanted to cry, to threaten, to manipulate. All the things she couldn't do when Elias Thorne was sitting next to me recording the conversation. I took a picture of the note and sent it to Thorne. "Add this to the evidence pile," I typed, "attempt to influence a witness." Then my father called. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message 5 minutes later, sitting in the dark of my living room. Marlowe, it is Dad. His voice sounded broken, not the angry patriarch from the doorstep, but a confused old man. I didn't know about the Silver Creek invoices. He stammered on the recording. Colleen said she was handling the vendor consolidation. She said it was more efficient. I just signed where she told me to sign. You have to believe me. Honey, I didn't look at the details. I just wanted everyone to be happy. I deleted the message. He didn't know. That was his defense. He had been the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, the trustee of his mother's legacy, and his defense was that he couldn't be bothered to read what he was signing because he wanted his wife to be happy. It was almost worse than if he had stolen the money himself. It was a profound, negligent weakness. He had traded my future and Haven's safety for a quiet life with a woman who despised us. By Friday, the investigation had moved from suspicion to confirmation. The forensic accounting team Thorne had hired was working through the weekend. I spent Saturday morning at their office, watching the spider web of transactions grow on the whiteboard. It is called layering, the lead accountant explained, pointing to a series of arrows. Money leaves the North Pine operating account. It goes to Silver Creek for materials. Silver Creek takes a cut, then transfers the rest to a holding company called Blue River. Blue River pays a consulting fee to a personal account in the Caymans, and from there, it comes back into the U.S. as investment income for Colleen. And the invoices? I asked. Fabricated, he said. We checked the shipping manifests. There is no record of any timber or fabric ever being delivered by Silver Creek. You were paying for air, Ms. Bennett, for 5 years. You have been buying expensive air. As the news of the freeze spread, the atmosphere in Ridgewater began to shift. It was subtle at first. The dirty looks at the grocery store became less frequent. The whispers stopped being hostile and started becoming curious. People in small towns are judgmental, but they are not stupid. They knew North Pine was the economic engine of the area. If the bank was freezing accounts, it wasn't because Marlowe Bennett was a jealous sister. It was because the money was gone. I received an email on my personal account late Saturday night. The subject line was blank. Ms. Bennett, the body read, I have worked in accounts payable for 10 years. I was told to process the Silver Creek invoices immediately, no questions asked, or I would be fired. I have the emails from Mrs. Bennett threatening my job. If you need them, tell me where to send them. It was signed simply, a friend. Then another one came, this one from the warehouse foreman. We never got that wood. I told Grant the inventory numbers didn't match the purchase orders. He told me to stop worrying about the paperwork and just build the furniture. I forwarded everything to Thorne. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. The dam had cracked, and the truth was leaking out from every seam. Sunday evening, I sat on the floor of Haven's room, helping her build a Lego castle. She was quiet, focused on clicking the plastic bricks together. Mom, she asked, not looking up, are we still in trouble? I handed her a red brick. No, sweetie. We were never in trouble. But Grandma Colleen is mad, and Uncle Dylan is weird. I paused. I had to explain this in a way that didn't poison her, but didn't lie to her either. Grandma Colleen and Uncle Dylan made some mistakes. I said carefully, they took things that didn't belong to them. And now, there are people, lawyers and judges, who are checking to make sure everyone follows the rules. Like a referee? Haven asked. Exactly like a referee, I smiled, and I am just helping the referee see the plays. She seemed satisfied with that. She clicked the red brick into place. Good, she said. Cheaters should not win. Monday morning brought the revelation that changed everything. I was at Thorne's office early. He was staring at a document that had just come in from the bank subpoena. His face was grim. We found something. Marlowe, he said, and it is bigger than the skimming. What is it? I asked, bracing myself. He slid a loan document across the desk. It was a guarantee for a massive line of credit. $3 million. It was taken out against the future assets of the trust fund. But the trust is irrevocable, I said. They cannot borrow against it. They found a loophole, Thorne said, or rather, they created one. They claimed the loan was for business expansion to benefit the beneficiaries. But look at who the guarantor is. I looked at the signature line. It wasn't Grant. It wasn't Colleen. It was Dylan. My breath caught in my throat. Dylan signed this? Thorne nodded. And look at the date. It was signed 6 months ago, just before the market dipped. I read the fine print. It was a personal guarantee. Colleen didn't sign it, I whispered, realization dawning on me like a cold sunrise. She made Dylan sign it. Exactly, Thorne said. The money from this loan went straight into the Silver Creek cycle. But the liability? That stays with Dylan. If the company defaults, and with the accounts frozen, the bank doesn't come after Colleen. They don't even come after Grant. They come after Dylan, I finished. Thorne leaned back. She set him up. Marlowe. She knew the walls were closing in. She knew the audit was a risk eventually. So she restructured the debt. She put the noose around her own son's neck. If this ship goes down, Dylan is the captain, the crew, and the anchor. He loses everything. His house, his savings, his future. I stared at the signature. Dylan Bennett, the golden boy, the heir apparent. He had walked into that dining room on New Year's Eve like a king, mocking me, holding his daughter like a trophy. He had called me a snake. He had tried to ruin my reputation. And all the while, he was nothing more than a human shield. His own mother had positioned him so that when the blow finally came, it would hit him first. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Colleen didn't just hate me. She didn't love anyone, not even the son she had spent 20 years worshipping. To her, we were all just assets or liabilities, and Dylan had just become her bad debt. I felt a strange, twisted pity for him. He was a bully. Yes, he was arrogant and mean, but he was also walking off a cliff that his mother had built for him, and he didn't even know he was falling yet. I looked at Thorne. Does he know? I asked. Thorne shook his head. Based on his social media posts? No. He thinks he is the CEO in waiting. He has no idea he is actually the designated fall guy. I stood up, grabbing my coat. What are you doing? Thorne asked. I am going to make a phone call, I said. To whom? To the only person who can stop this before it destroys everything, I said, but not the way they think. I walked out of the office. The game had changed. It wasn't just about recovering the money anymore. It was about watching them cannibalize each other. And I had the match that would light the fuse. The realization hit me not like a lightning bolt, but like a slow, creeping frost that started at my toes and worked its way up to my throat. I sat in Elias Thorne's office, staring at the loan guarantee that Dylan had signed, and suddenly, the entire evening of New Year's Eve replayed in my mind. But the genre of the movie had changed. It was not a family drama anymore. It was a heist film. I had spent days thinking that Colleen shoved Haven out of that chair because she was cruel, because she preferred Sloane, because she wanted to humiliate me. I had thought it was an act of emotional violence. I was wrong. It was a stress test. Colleen needed to know something very specific before she finalized the next phase of her financial restructuring. She needed to know if I was still the obedient, cowering daughter who would swallow any indignity to keep the peace. She needed to know if I would let them erase my daughter from the family picture without a fight. If I had stayed silent when Haven hit the floor, if I had picked her up, apologized for the mess, and sat at the kids' table like a good little outcast, Colleen would have known she was safe. She would have known that I was too weak to ever question the trust fund. She would have known that she could proceed with the final looting of the company because no one was watching the back door. But I had stood up, I had walked out, and in doing so, I had not just ruined a party. I had signaled that the security system of the Bennett family was finally active. That was why they were panicking. That was why they sent the lawsuits and the bribes. They were not afraid of my anger. They were afraid that I had finally woken up. Thorne interrupted my thoughts. Look at the structure of the loan. Marlowe, it is brilliant in a sick way. I looked. The $3 million borrowed against the company's future revenue wasn't for general operations. It was designated for a specialized workshop expansion to be overseen by Dylan. But there is no expansion. I said, I drive by the factory every day. There is no construction crew. Exactly, Thorne said. The money went into the expansion account. Then, Dylan, acting as the project lead, authorized payments to, guess who? Silver Creek, I whispered. Silver Creek Logistics, for project management and supply chain optimization. The money flowed out of the bank, through Dylan's hands, into the shell company, and straight into Colleen's offshore accounts. But here's the twist, Thorne continued, tapping the signature line. The loan is structured so that if the funds are misused, or if the project fails to materialize, the liability does not fall on the general corporate board. It falls on the project guarantor, Dylan. My half-brother had signed his life away. He thought he was signing paperwork to become a big shot, to play the role of the visionary heir building a new wing of the factory. In reality, he was signing a confession. Colleen had set it up so that when the bank eventually came looking for their missing $3 million, they wouldn't look at her. They would look at the man who authorized the payments. She built a firewall out of her own son, I said. Thorne nodded grimly. And she needs you to sign that settlement agreement. Marlowe, she needs you to sign the non-disclosure agreement before the bank finishes their audit. If you sign, the investigation stops. The bank relaxes. She has time to move the money again, maybe cover the tracks. But if I keep pushing, the bank connects the dots, and Dylan goes to prison. It was a staggering level of betrayal. I had always known Colleen was selfish. I had always known she loved money. But I had assumed, perhaps naively, that she loved her biological child. I realize now that for a woman like Colleen, people were not loved. They were utilized. Dylan was just another asset, and like any asset, he was depreciable. And that explained the obsession with Sloane. Seat for the real granddaughter. It wasn't just a slur, it was a legal positioning. My phone buzzed. It was Noah again. He had sent me a photo of a document he had dug out of his personal archives. It was the minutes from a board meeting 2 years ago, a meeting I was never invited to. Agenda Item 4. Adjustment of Beneficiary Definitions. I zoomed in on the text. The board, led by Grant and Colleen, had discussed a motion to redefine the active family unit for the purpose of the trust distributions. They argued that since I was not involved in the day-to-day operations, and since Haven was not being groomed for succession, the bulk of the educational and housing stipends should be prioritized for the primary lineage. Sloane. They weren't just favoring her, they were trying to legally recategorize Haven as a non-entity, by pushing Haven out of the chair, by excluding her from photos, by creating a public narrative that we were estranged. They were building a case to cut us out of the trust entirely. Every time I had stayed silent in the past, I had been helping them build the case against my own daughter. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. It was harder and sharper than anything I had felt before. Thorne, I said, send the letter. Which letter? The notification to all parties. I want it on record. Any attempt to contact me personally will be considered witness tampering. Any attempt to contact my daughter will be considered harassment. I want a wall of steel between me and them. No more coffees. No more sad dad visits. No more bribes. If they want to talk to me, they can talk to a deposition camera. Thorne smiled. It was a vicious, satisfied smile. Done. The rest of the week was a blur of legal maneuvers. The notice went out. The silence from the Bennett estate was deafening. My father, Grant, must have realized the walls were closing in. He was not just facing a lawsuit now. He was facing the reality that he had allowed his wife to frame his son. He was a man watching his house burn down while holding a bucket of gasoline. I expected more attacks. I expected slashed tires or more anonymous threats. I did not expect the knock on my car window late Friday night. I had just left the grocery store. It was raining. A cold, miserable sleet that turned the parking lot into a gray blur. I was loading bags into the trunk when I saw a figure standing by the cart return. It was Dylan. He looked terrible. The golden boy shine was gone. His hair was wet and plastered to his forehead. He wasn't wearing a coat, just a hoodie that looked like he had slept in it. His eyes were dark hollows in a pale face. I froze, my hand gripping the handle of the trunk. I reached for my phone in my pocket, ready to dial Thorne or the police. "Marlowe," he said. His voice was cracked, broken. "I told you, Dylan. Talk to my lawyer." "I cannot talk to your lawyer," he said. He took a step closer, and I saw that he was shivering, not from the cold, but from fear. Pure, unadulterated terror. "Step back," I warned. He stopped. He held up his hands. They were empty. "I went to the bank today," he said. The words came out in a rush. "I tried to withdraw cash from my personal account. For the mortgage. They told me my account was frozen. They told me there is a lien on my assets." I didn't say anything. I just watched him. "I went to Mom." He continued. "I asked her what was happening. I asked her about the workshop loan. I told her the bank said I am liable for $3 million. He laughed. A sound that sounded like a sob caught in his throat. "You know what she said? She said I should have read the paperwork better. She said it was a learning opportunity for me." The rain beat down on the roof of my car. "She told me not to worry," Dylan said. "She said if I just stay quiet, she can fix it." But she looked at me. "Marlowe." She looked at me like she was looking at a stranger. "She is packing bags. I saw the suitcases in the hallway." I felt a twinge of sympathy, but I shoved it down. He had mocked me. He had helped them. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I saw the emails," he whispered. "I broke into her office computer an hour ago. I saw the transfers to the Caymans. She isn't fixing it. She is leaving. She is going to leave me with the debt. She is going to let me go to jail for her." He looked at me, and for the first time in 20 years, I saw the little brother I used to protect in the treehouse. The arrogance was stripped away, leaving just a scared kid who realized the monster under the bed was actually the woman who tucked him in. "You were right," he said. "You were right about everything." He reached into his hoodie pocket. I tensed, but he pulled out a USB drive, a different one. "This is the real project file," he said. "It shows that she told me where to send the money. It shows the emails where she directed me to sign the guarantee. It proves I was just following orders. It proves I didn't know it was a shell company." He held it out to me. His hand was shaking. "If I give this to the police, I implicate myself," he said. "I admit I was incompetent. I admit I signed things I shouldn't have. I lose the reputation. I lose the title." "You lose the lie," I said. He nodded, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "She used me, Marlowe. She told me I was the heir. She told me I was special. She was just fattening me up for the slaughter." I looked at the drive. This was it. This was the final nail. With this, I could prove the intent. I could prove the conspiracy. "Take it," he said, thrusting it at me. "Just, when you burn her down, please don't let Haven hate me." I took the drive. It was cold and wet metal in my palm. "I am not doing this to make Haven hate anyone, Dylan," I said softly. "I am doing this so she doesn't have to grow up in a world where people like Colleen win." He nodded. He looked at his car, then back at me. "I have to go back," he said. "If she knows I am gone, she will suspect." "Dylan," I said. He stopped. "Do not sign anything else. Not a check. Not a birthday card. Nothing." He gave me a weak, tragic smile. "I think I am done signing things for the rest of my life." He turned and walked away into the rain. A man who had lost his kingdom but perhaps, just barely, saved his soul. I got into my car and locked the doors. I sat there for a long time, holding the drive. Colleen thought she was playing chess. She thought she could sacrifice a pawn to save the queen. But she had made a fatal mistake. She forgot that the pawn can turn into a queen if it makes it to the other side of the board. And Dylan had just crossed the board. I started the engine. I wasn't going home. I was going to Thorne's house. It was late, but this couldn't wait. We had the evidence to stop the flight. We had the evidence to freeze the Cayman accounts before she could touch them. The trap she had built for me, The trap she had tried to push my daughter into was about to snap shut on her own leg, and the person tripping the wire wasn't me. It was the son she thought she owned. The USB drive Dylan had handed me in the rain did not just contain files. It contained the autopsy of a family. I sat in Elias Thorne's office on Monday morning, watching the forensic accountant, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah, scroll through the data. Every click of her mouse was a nail in the coffin of North Pine Heritage Works. The audit was complete. The picture it painted was not just of greed, but of a desperate, frenzied looting. "It is worse than we thought," Sarah said, adjusting her glasses. "It is not just the inflated vendor invoices, it is the tax evasion. They have been categorizing personal renovations on the estate as facility maintenance. They wrote off a $50,000 trip to Italy as sourcing research." She turned the screen toward me. "And here is the kicker," she said. "They stopped paying the payroll taxes for the factory workers 3 months ago. The money was withheld from the paychecks, but it never went to the government. It went to Blue River Holdings." I felt sick. Stealing from me was one thing. Stealing from the men and women who built the furniture, exposing them to the IRS, was a level of depravity I hadn't anticipated. Thorne looked at me. "This is federal, Marlo. Once we file this report with the court for the hearing, the IRS and the Department of Labor get involved. This isn't a family dispute anymore. It is a crime scene." That was when my phone rang. It was Dylan. I hesitated, then answered. I put it on speaker so Thorne could hear. "Marlo." Dylan's voice was a jagged whisper. "You have to stop." I looked at the recorder spinning on Thorne's desk. "Dylan," I said, "I cannot stop. We found the payroll tax fraud." There was a silence on the other end, heavy and terrified. "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "I know about the taxes. But if you file that report, if the feds come in, they seize everything, Marlo. They will take my house. They will take the college fund I started for Sloan. You should have thought about that when you signed the papers. Dylan?" "I didn't know," he shouted, the panic taking over. "I thought it was temporary. Colleen said it was a cash flow bridge. She said we would pay it back next quarter. Marlo, please, Sloan is 6 years old. If I lose the house, where do we go? I have no savings. Everything was tied up in the company stock." I closed my eyes. I heard the echo of my own voice from years ago, begging my father for help with rent, only to be turned away. I heard the sound of Haven crying when I told her we couldn't afford ballet lessons. "Dylan," I said, keeping my voice steady, "you are asking me to bury evidence of a felony so you can keep a house bought with stolen money." "I am asking you to have mercy on your niece," he pleaded. "You know what it is like to struggle. Why would you want that for Sloan?" "I do not want that for Sloan," I said, "but I am not the one who did this to her. You are, and Colleen is. I am just the one turning on the lights." I hung up. My hand was shaking. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. It would have been so easy to say yes, to work out a deal where Dylan kept his house and Colleen took the fall. But the truth does not bargain. The moment you start negotiating with the truth, it becomes a lie. 2 hours later, Grant arrived. He didn't come to my apartment. He came to Thorne's office. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 days. His suit, usually immaculate, hung loosely on his frame. He carried a leather briefcase, gripping the handle so tightly his knuckles were white. Thorne sat next to me. We didn't offer him coffee. Grant sat down and placed the briefcase on the table. He didn't open it immediately. He looked at me, his eyes watery and red-rimmed. "Marlo," he began, "we can fix this. There is no fixing tax fraud." "Dad," I said. Grant winced at the word. "We can restructure," he said quickly. "I have spoken to some private investors, friends. They are willing to bridge the gap. We can pay back the payroll taxes before the government notices. We can replenish the trust." He opened the briefcase. Inside was a single checkbook and a legal document. "I am prepared to offer you a lump sum," he said, $200,000, and a 10% stake in the company moving forward. All you have to do is withdraw the petition for the audit and sign a non-disclosure agreement. I looked at the checkbook. $200,000. It was a fortune. It was freedom. But then I looked at the NDA. The undersigned agrees to never discuss, disclose, or disparage the financial management of North Pine Heritage Works. It was a muzzle. Why? I asked. Why are you still protecting her? Grant looked down at his hands. She is my wife, Marlo. And I am your daughter, I said. And Haven is your granddaughter. You watched her get shoved onto a floor. Dad, you watched her get treated like a second-class citizen for her entire life. And now, you want to pay me off so you can protect the woman who did it? It is not about protecting her, he whispered. It is about the name, the Bennett name. If this comes out, we are ruined. I will be remembered as a crook. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city skyline. You are already ruined. Dad, the money doesn't change that. The reputation doesn't change that. You let your wife turn your legacy into a criminal enterprise. I turned back to him. If I take that money, I am just another employee you paid off. I am just another person on the payroll of your lies. And then, 10 years from now, when Haven asks me why I let you get away with it, I will have to tell her I sold her dignity for $200,000. I leaned over the table. Keep your money. I want the hearing. Grant closed the briefcase. He stood up slowly, looking defeated. You are making a mistake, he said. You are burning down the house to kill a rat. Better than living in a house infested with them, I replied. He left. As the door closed, Thorne looked at me with a newfound respect. You know, he said, most people would have taken the check. I am not most people, I said. I am the one who remembers. By Wednesday, the implosion inside the Bennett estate had spilled out into the open. The pressure from the bank freeze and the looming audit had cracked the facade of unity. I received a frantic text from Noah. You need to see this. It is happening. He forwarded me a screenshot of a group chat that included the senior management of North Pine. Colleen had sent a message, accidentally or perhaps intentionally, to the wrong group. I never signed those guarantee documents. The message read, Grant told me it was standard procedure. I was just following his instructions. If the money is missing, ask the CEO. She was turning on him. 10 minutes later, another screenshot arrived. This one was from Dylan, sent to the same group. My mother is lying. She directed every transfer. I have the emails. She is trying to frame Dad and me to save herself. It was a circular firing squad. Colleen was blaming Grant. Dylan was blaming Colleen. And Grant was likely sitting in his study, drinking scotch and wondering how his life had become a Shakespearean tragedy. Thorne called me into his office later that day. The other side just filed a motion, he said, sounding amused. What kind of motion? Colleen's lawyer is petitioning to have her named as a separate party from Grant. She is claiming spousal ignorance. She wants to sever her liability from his. I laughed. It was a cold, bitter sound. She is divorcing him, I said. Not legally, maybe, but financially, she is cutting the rope. She sees the ship sinking. Thorne agreed. She is trying to hop on a lifeboat, but she has a problem. What is that? We have the USB drive Dylan gave you, Thorne said. We have the metadata. We have the IP addresses. We can prove she was the architect. She can blame Grant all she wants, but the digital fingerprints don't lie. The days leading up to the hearing were a blur of preparation. I spent hours with Thorne, going over every transaction, every email, every date. We built a timeline that was bulletproof. But the emotional toll was mounting. I couldn't sleep. I kept having nightmares about the dining room, about Haven falling. But in the dream, I didn't stand up. In the dream, I stayed seated, and the floor swallowed us whole. On the night before the hearing, I sat Haven down. Tomorrow is a big day, I told her. Are you going to fight the bad guys? She asked. I smoothed her hair. I am going to tell the truth, I said, and sometimes that is the biggest fight of all. She looked at me, her eyes wise beyond her years. Will Grandma Colleen be there? Yes. Will she be mad? Probably. Haven thought about this for a moment. "It is okay if she is mad," she said finally. "You are stronger than her." I hugged her, holding on tight. She was right. I was stronger. Not because I had money or power or a company. I was stronger because I had nothing to hide. My phone buzzed one last time. It was a message from Dylan. "I am sorry." It read, "I am sorry for everything. I am going to tell them. I am going to tell them what she did. Even if I lose the house. You were right. I have to choose." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The choice had been made. The next morning, I put on my best suit. It was old, bought on sale years ago, but I pressed it until it was sharp. I walked into the courthouse with Elias Thorne by my side. The hallway was crowded. I saw my father standing by the window, looking gray and ghostly. I saw Dylan sitting on a bench, his head in his hands. And I saw Colleen. She was standing with her lawyer, a slick man in a $3,000 suit. She looked perfect. Her hair was sprayed into submission, her makeup flawless. She looked like a queen who was annoyed by a minor inconvenience. When she saw me, her eyes narrowed. She didn't look scared. She looked hateful. She walked over to me, stopping just inches away. "You think you have won," she whispered, her voice like venom. "You think because you have a few spreadsheets, you can take me down? I built this family. I made your father a success. You are just a jealous little girl who couldn't handle not being the favorite." I looked at her. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel intimidated. I just felt a profound sense of clarity. "I am not jealous, Colleen," I said calmly, "and I am not a little girl." I leaned in close, so only she could hear. "I am the auditor, and your books are closed." I turned and walked into the courtroom. The heavy wooden doors swung shut behind me, sealing the past away. The time for whispers and secrets was over. It was time for the record to speak. The hearing at the county courthouse was nothing like the legal dramas I had watched on television. There were no shouting matches, no surprise witnesses bursting through the double doors, and no dramatic gavel bangs echoing through a packed gallery. It was just a quiet, sterile room filled with the dry rustle of paper and the low hum of the ventilation system. The silence was heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on our shoulders. I sat on the plaintiff's side with Elias Thorne. Across the aisle, my family sat in a row. Grant looked gray and shrunken, staring at his hands. Colleen sat ramrod straight, her eyes fixed on a point above the judge's head, refusing to acknowledge my existence. Dylan sat on the end, looking like a man waiting for a firing squad. The proceedings were clinical. That was what made them so devastating. Eldon Voss, the estate lawyer, spoke first. He did not use emotional language. He simply walked the judge through the timeline of the trust. He displayed the original charter my grandmother had signed, highlighting the clause that strictly forbade the use of trust principal for operational expenses or personal enrichment. Then came Sarah, the forensic accountant. She set up a projector and displayed the flow of money. It was a simple, brutal visual. Blue lines represented legitimate company expenses. Red lines represented the withdrawals to Silver Creek Logistics and Blue River Holdings. By the time she was finished, the screen was bleeding red. She traced a single transaction, a transfer of $12,000 authorized by Grant Bennett, sent to Silver Creek, then routed to a holding account in the Cayman Islands, and finally withdrawn to pay for a consulting retreat at a 5-star resort in Tuscany, where Colleen and Grant had renewed their vows 2 years ago. The courtroom remained silent. My father closed his eyes. We called our witnesses. Noah Calder took the stand. He testified about the pressure to fire the old, honest suppliers. He testified about the day he was let go for questioning the price hikes on the raw timber. We brought in the owner of the old fabric mill, a man who had done business with my grandmother for 30 years. He testified that Colleen had explicitly told him that if he did not add a 15% administrative surcharge to his invoices, money that would be kicked back to her, he would lose the contract. He refused. He lost the contract. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a racket. Then came the moment my family thought would save them. The countersuit for defamation. Their lawyer stood up, chest puffed out, ready to paint me as the vindictive, unstable daughter who was smearing the family name on the internet. "Your Honor," he boomed, "the plaintiff has engaged in a campaign of harassment. Her brother, Mr. Dylan Bennett, has been forced to defend his reputation against baseless attacks." Elias Thorne stood up slowly. He held a single piece of paper. "Your Honor," he said, his voice gravelly and calm, "we would like to submit the defendant's own social media posts into evidence." He handed the judge the screenshot of the post Dylan had made on New Year's Day, the one with the photo of him and Sloane, captioned with the text about protecting the legacy from greedy relatives. Thorne continued, "These posts prove that the defendants were not victims of harassment, but rather the instigators of a coordinated public smear campaign designed to silence a whistleblower. They used their social standing to intimidate Ms. Bennett into dropping her inquiry into the fraud. This was not defense. It was obstruction." The judge looked at the post. He looked at Dylan. Dylan shrank into his seat, his face burning with shame. The weapon they had tried to use against me had just blown up in their hands. During the recess, just before the final ruling, the bailiff opened the doors. I walked out into the hallway to get a drink of water. "Ms. Bennett." I turned. It was Colleen. She was alone. Her lawyer was busy arguing with Grant in the corner. She walked up to me. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a frantic, clawing desperation. "How much?" she asked. Her voice was a hiss. "Excuse me?" I asked. "How much do you want?" she repeated. "We can liquidate the vacation home. I can get you $300,000 cash by tomorrow. Just tell the judge you want to settle. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. Marlo, think about it. $300,000. You could move away. You could start over." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had made my life a misery for 2 decades. I looked at the woman who had shoved my daughter onto the floor and called it reclaiming a seat. She still didn't get it. She thought everyone had a price because she had a price. She thought money was the only language that mattered. "I do not want your money, Colleen." I said. "Then what do you want?" she snapped. "Revenge? Is that it? You want to see us suffer?" I shook my head. "I want the truth recorded in the official court transcript." I said, "I want it written down, signed by a judge, and filed in the public record forever. I want it so that 50 years from now, if anyone looks up the name Bennett, they will know exactly who you were." I turned and walked back into the courtroom. The verdict, when it came, was swift and crushing. The judge found that the trustees, Grant and Colleen, had breached their fiduciary duty. He cited the bad actor clause in my grandmother's will. Effective immediately, he ruled, Grant Bennett is removed as the trustee of the Alara Bennett estate. Colleen Bennett is removed from any administrative role regarding the assets. Control of the trust, including the majority voting shares of North Pine Heritage Works, is transferred to the primary beneficiary who identified the breach. That is Ms. Marlo Bennett. He also ordered a full restitution plan. The Cayman accounts were to be frozen and repatriated. The loans taken out in Dylan's name were declared fraudulent liabilities of the previous administration, shielding him from immediate bankruptcy, but leaving the debt to be settled by the liquidation of Colleen's personal assets. Grant was allowed to remain as a figurehead on the board for the sake of market stability, but his signature authority was revoked. He could not sign a check for more than $100 without my approval. Colleen was barred from the company premises. As the gavel came down, I did not cheer. I did not smile. I just exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding since I was 6 years old. We walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. My father and Colleen went out the back exit to avoid the few local reporters who had gathered. Dylan was standing by the steps. He looked lost. He had kept his house, thanks to the ruling proving he was manipulated, but his reputation was in tatters. The heir narrative was dead. He looked at me, waiting for the final blow. He expected me to fire him. He expected me to exile him like they had exiled me. I walked up to him. "So," I said. "So," he replied, his voice hollow. "When do you want me to clear out my desk?" I looked at him. "I do not want you to clear out your desk," I said. But you are not the creative director anymore. You do not have a private workshop, and you certainly do not have a company card." He blinked, confused. "Then, what am I?" "You are an employee," I said. "If you want to stay at North Pine, you can. But you are going to learn how to actually make furniture. You are going to start on the sanding floor with Noah. You are going to work 8-hour shifts. You are going to punch a clock, and you are going to learn the difference between a dovetail joint and a nail gun." I paused, looking him in the eye. "Noah is the new production manager. You answer to him. If you are late, he docks your pay. If you complain, he fires you." Dylan stood there, processing this. It was a demotion. Yes, it was a humiliation, but it was also a lifeline. I was giving him the one thing Colleen never did, a chance to be a man, not a prop. He swallowed hard, then nodded. "Okay," he said, "the sanding floor. Be there at 7 tomorrow." I said, "Do not be late." 1 year later. The snow was falling softly outside the window of my small house. It was the same house I had lived in before the lawsuit. I had not moved to the estate. I had not bought a mansion. I used the trust fund exactly as my grandmother intended, to secure the company, to pay the workers fair wages, and to ensure Haven's education was safe. The kitchen smelled of roasted chicken and apple pie. It was just me and Haven. We were sitting at our small round table, wearing matching pajamas. There were no guests, no business partners, no performance, just us. Haven was 9 now. She was taller, her hair longer. The bruise on her knee had faded long ago, leaving no mark. She was quiet for a moment, poking at her mashed potatoes. "Mom?" she asked. "Yeah, baby?" She looked up at me with those big, serious eyes. "Do you remember last New Year's Eve, at Grandpa's house?" I put down my fork. "I remember." "Why did we leave?" she asked. "I mean, I know Grandma Colleen pushed me, but why didn't we just move to another table? Why did we have to change everything?" I looked at her. I thought about the fear. I thought about the invoices. I thought about the moment I realized that silence was a slow death. I reached across the table and took her hand. Because, Haven, sometimes people try to make you feel small so they can feel big. And if you stay in the seat they pick for you, you stay small forever. She squeezed my hand. "So what did you do?" she asked. I smiled. It was a genuine, peaceful smile. "I stood up," I said, "and I chose you." She smiled back, satisfied. "Good choice," she said. "Best choice I ever made," I replied. We finished our dinner in the warm glow of the kitchen light, safe and whole, while the snow covered the world outside in a blanket of clean, white silence. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts on Marlowe's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, liking this video, and hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story. Your support means the world to us.